Hello. Thanks for having us, Innovate Finance. Thanks everybody for coming. I hope you're all having a really good day. So, as you just heard, we're here to talk about the expanding threat map and modern resilience, what it means for us all. So, you've heard a fair bit today if you've been to any of the other talks about growth and innovation, and I'm absolutely sure you've been hearing a bit about AI. But we're here to talk about whether the system can actually keep going if and when things go wrong. So the clue's in the name. The threat map facing financial services is expanding. We're not just talking about cyber attacks, we're talking about post-quantum failures, we're talking about supply chain concentration risk, and if you've been keeping an eye on the news, we're talking about cataclysmic effects of geopolitical change and turmoil. So we're not talking about resilience just as a technical control, but we're talking about resilience as a vital business strategy. If I could just ask my panel to introduce themselves from left to right, you'll see by the time we get to the right how you're in good hands, because we've got a really good panel of expert speakers with a lot of views to share, which we want to move into as quickly as possible.
Hi, I'm Loane from nCino, and I'm the Information Security Officer that covers EMEA and APAC.
I'm Mendy. I'm the Chief Business Officer of Zilch and also the founding co-chair of the Unicorn Council.
Hello, I'm Sharon. I'm a capital markets partner at Hogan Lovells, and I co-chair our digital assets and blockchain practice.
Hi, Mike Walters, CEO and co-founder of Form 3.
And Etienne Burgh from Office of the CISO and Google Cloud.
Excellent, thanks guys. And I'm really interested to hear what you've all got to say. But Etienne, if I can start with you, I want to touch upon the threats themselves. Okay, so you've previously spoken about attackers shifting their focus, their dynamic, their modus operandi, if you like, from simply stealing data to actually taking organizations down, taking them out, impacting ongoing resilience and operations. So from your perspective, how have the threats actually changed? What's changed about the nature of the threat, and how do firms need to think about resilience, not just security, but proper ongoing operations through resilience disrupting events?
Great question. So I think I'm going to steal a phrase from Kieran Martin. We're moving from this age of sort of thieves to thugs. And what I mean by that is, in the past, people were just really focused on stealing your data. But now what they're really focused on is actually taking you out and taking your systems down so that your organization can't operate. And that's a real change, that's a real sea change we're seeing. Some of it's driven by sort of political events, some of it is driven by national state, threat actors deciding that they want to cause harm to a given jurisdiction or to a set of companies in that jurisdiction. And what you find is they're actually running campaigns in the same way you think of like an advertising campaign. They'll attack a whole sector. And if they attack the financial sector, they'll attack the whole sector at the same time with a similar set of methodologies and tools. So we're really starting to see that they're moving from this change to just trying to steal your data to actually to take your systems out. And to evidence that, just think about one of the large UK motor manufacturers who's taking out of operations for a period of time, and also some of our sort of retailers that were also taken out of operations for a period of time. So these things are really happening, and that's kind of the changing focus. I'm going to come on to some of the AI bits. One thing, in terms of guidance, I think one thing we must say is there's the amount of time it takes you to recover and the amount of time your company is liquid. And if the amount of time it takes your organization to recover is greater than your cash flow and you go bust before you can recover, that's where you have a challenge. So it's making sure that both those things do align, or essentially you can recover before you run out of cash. Now with AI and Glasswing, there's lots and lots of interest in the press about what's happening there. If you cast your mind back to the days of the internet, essentially the change there was really scale. So you could operate at scale, but also you had to secure yourself and make yourself resilient at scale. And now with AI, you still have scale, but speed is now the key determinant. Can you defend yourself at speed, and can you recover at speed? And I think that's what we'll see, moving forward. It's the ability to react and respond at speed is going to be the key indicator of success.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose a couple of things, just touching upon that. The automotive manufacturer that was impacted, the idea of liquidity resilience is something that affected their supply chain, perhaps more than it did them. They were big enough to withstand, whereas some of their smaller suppliers whose orders stopped coming through weren't able to survive that particular event. So Sharon, if I can move on to you on that theme, many risks therefore now sit above individual firms. So we're talking about concentration risk in supply chains, AI-driven attack surface, and cross-border dependencies. And we've seen the regulatory landscape evolve, not necessarily as fast as those threats and those changes, but certainly evolve. So from a financial system perspective, where would you say that firms might be exposed without realizing it, or at least fully realizing it?
It's also a good question, but I think I'll start by saying, you have to respect the law. And regulation has started to tackle some of these subjects, not necessarily in a consistent manner and not necessarily in an adequate manner, but there are laws such as DORA that apply not just within the UK, but globally, certainly within Europe, and equivalent laws in other jurisdictions. So thinking about complying with the law, I think, is a good way to start. But beyond that, I do think it's actually stepping back a little bit, like Etienne said, and actually thinking about those risks and how they impact your ability to do business. Supply chain is a particularly difficult issue if all that gets jammed up. Liquidity is another one, and I think one which people forget, but actually is not so far away, was SVI. SVI went down like that over a weekend, and SVI in London also went down like that over the weekend. And most of you fintechs banked with SVI. So thinking about your own concentration risk, where your money is, where your capital is, where your liquidity is, I think is a very important point, and I think it dovetails quite nicely with what Etienne says. Lastly, I think I'd probably say that trying to map the risks, you referenced the news. I think there's a huge temptation not to look at the news, it's so dreadful, but actually reading the FT and thinking about how the news is impacting your business on a daily basis, and taking steps to think about what would happen if we were subject to a cyber attack. What would happen if actually a missile from Iran was able to touch London? Things like that. And just then trying to build a resilience plan around that. But first of all, comply with the law.
Super, thanks, Sharon. And Mike, I mean, talk about the supply chain. You're in the supply chain. I wouldn't be too surprised if we found Form 3 on a great many DORA Register of Information responses, and therefore, very firmly in the regulatory spotlight yourself as a critical supplier. So your downtime tolerance must be incredibly low, and that of your customers for what you do for them. Your safety and resilience requirements must be incredibly high. So the challenge, considering that nobody, yourselves included, can ever promise that nothing will ever go wrong, is making your way through it when it does. So in a practical sense, how do you make that come to life? What does that look like at scale? I think 23 countries, did you just say?
Yeah, we've got people in 23 places. We've been fortunate enough to grow to about 35-40% of payments processed in the UK. And the reason that lots of you won't have heard of us is that it works. If it stops working, people will hear about us very quickly. And so really at the heart of what we do is think about how new current cloud-native platform technology can be secured and how you make it operationally resilient and where you make those choices. And so I think, for us, we've made some quite sort of fundamental design choices, both about technology and how we run the business. I guess the first of those is that we went into production about 3 years ago, having taken a view that we could not be dependent solely on a single cloud provider, and that the best way for us to evidence that that was the case was to run actively across all three hyperscalers in the UK, the US, and Europe. And that, I guess, is an example of taking what is a theoretically low probability event, very sophisticated, very resilient, still significantly better than proprietary data center organizations, and taking a view on, what happens if, and what do you do about it? And so I think, we wind into our thought process and our decision making, not just where do we have alternatives for supply and provision, and whether that is how we think about DDoS protection, how we think about software that we use, how we think about tools that we use, how we think about communication inside the business. Should we lose Slack? What replaces it? Should we lose Zoom? What replaces it? Should we lose email? What replaces it? You get a little bit sort of doom hungry, I guess, with all of those sort of situations that can fail. And so I think for us, it's really about acknowledging that things will just break. Stuff will just happen, and therefore having an alternative and knowing that you've tried and tested your ability to recover either that alternative or just in total is actually the best way to deal with a landscape where the cause could be many, many, many different things. And it's much harder to spot the cause than it is to necessarily think about things that you can protect and manage and create processes around.
Yeah, and if I just ask a follow-up question to that, because I'm quite interested in it. You talked about not being tied into a single cloud infrastructure, for instance. So what does that look like in practice? Are you talking multi-hyperscaler environment and testing failovers?
No, completely. So we just run real time across 9 data centers, which are effectively 3 hyperscalers with availability zones, 3 in each. And look, some of this stuff is about, what would you pay for your own risk appetite? Like at the scale we operate, we have to do this effectively on behalf of nearly on behalf of the country, right? And so therefore, we have to invest in that at a level that maybe an individual organisation wouldn't. But even if your risk tolerance is, we understand how this works, you still need to understand what bits of your infrastructure could fail and how you would manage and how you would recover those things. And being really clear about understanding the nature of your customers and what type of impact they would expect and what type of sort of recovery time your business needs for your customers for the type of service that you provide.
Yeah. So striking a really, I suppose, ongoing balance between protection and recovery. Yes. You said the word if. Not when, so that's the old phrase, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's nothing wooden to touch; it's all plastic. Look, shit happens, and it can be accidental, it can be human error, it can be deliberate, it can be, increasingly it will be, orchestrated and distributed attacks. But look, the resolution of those things can be common. Yeah. How you get through them can be common, and those are things worth investing in for sure.
Super, thank you. And I mean, Alex, when we were planning for this session, what you've just heard is, I suppose, the antithesis of the tick box sort of compliance idea, and you've been very clear that I think you used the phrase resilience fails when it's a compliance tick box exercise. And I don't think you're saying that resilience failures arise from tick box compliance. I think you're just saying that the principle of resilience has been missed. So, across incident response readiness and supply chain exposure, and what would you say, not necessarily from an nCino standpoint, I wouldn't want you to stand in front of the crowd and say what you're getting wrong, but what are organizations getting wrong when it comes to planning for resilience and executing for resilience?
I mean, it feeds on quite well from what Mike was saying, is that, you've got disaster recovery plans, incident response plans, but do you actually test them properly? Do you know, where those failures could arise? And more importantly then is that, what do you want to do about them? If you can afford to have, 3 different, providers, then great. But if you can't, you need to know that and be honest as a company. It's not just something that sits within an IT function or a CISO function. It's across the entire business. Do you have those plans? Do you actually go through the plans, test them properly with all of the stakeholders? Does everyone actually know what they're supposed to do during that incident or during that disaster recovery? Is it something that you just say, oh yeah, we do a tabletop once a year, yeah, it's okay. But then during a real incident, what if that person isn't around that you did that test with? So it is around just being honest as a business, involving every area of that business, and doing that regularly. It's not just something you go, oh yeah, we did a tabletop once a year. That kind of covers everything. If you want to be resilient, you need to actually do these things regularly, and it needs to be across the board. People need to be trained and know what they're doing.
Yeah, and maybe have a bit of fun with them as well. Actually, you learn an awful lot from them.
Yeah, definitely. You can, depending on what the scenarios are, you can, there's various things you can cover, and potentially the idea is you find what those gaps are. You want to be able to know what those gaps are and where, how you can fill them. And it could be that you're not backing up something that you just rely on, say Office 365, and you just rely on the backups. Do you take extra backups? So if anything does go down, you can recover quickly. We've seen it with AWS. Because of the Iran war, that's been impacted. And if customers have separate backups, they will be able to recover quicker.
Super, thank you. And Ryan, coming to you, we had a good chat earlier about commercial pragmatism, the need to sort of push features into the market. So I'd like to get your commercial founder experience as well, and you've done this at significant scale yourself. So resilience investment, I suppose, has always been something that might compete, even disrupt commercial growth, speed to the market, customer experience. So how, as a leadership team, can you make, if it is a trade-off, a credible trade-off, to make sure that you're doing really cool stuff, but the wheels aren't going to come off at any given moment? If you've got any thoughts you can share on that.
Yeah, great. And Sharon, you raised a really good point. I think resilience, I think one thing we should really take care of is what is it all about? I think Charlie Munger once said trust is one of the greatest economical forces. And if you think about in the UK, that's actually probably that's what we really do. We export trust and reassurance. And so in financial services, it's everything. You don't scale product, you scale trust. And this is where, if you take a look at like resilience, it used to be about defense, and today it's about the price of growth. And so the stakes are real. You take a look at cybercrime, it's now a $10 trillion global problem. $1 of fraud, if you really consider it, comes now close in a study that's just been done by NVIDIA. $5 when you factor in recovery, operations, and trust. So it's real, and I guess, even talking of resilience, I guess, like, for me, it's more of a personal story. As a young mixed-race kid growing up in East London with a mother with working 3 jobs, bringing up 2 boys, naughty boys at that. But the reality is I know the real truth is that that was a real tough neighborhood as well to grow up in. No one would have predicted I would be sitting here as well. But success isn't a straight line; it's a maze. And if you take a look at what's going on, then with hope, I've seen some real hope over the last 3 decades. I've been working in the city, from the big banks through to running a company. I think the reality is, take a look at what we're seeing in female equality. My very first bosses were female, and you take a look at what's happening now with the stakeholder ownership and the recognition that they're getting, and the equality to be in leadership positions and actually be funded. That's human progress. So now when you take a look at what we're doing at Zilch, Phil, our founder, when I first met him, I was one of the people who sort of helped write the story, raise the money, and one of the things that we looked at was we need to have a North Star vision, and the vision really was about genuinely, could we remove a $1 trillion annual societal problem that is in the market? And that ultimately was, could we eliminate the high cost of consumer credit and add waste? And now when you take a look at it as a business, we're now profitable, we're now scalable, we've now done that in the UK, and we've just gone and bought a European bank Some say for Christmas because we signed it off on Christmas Eve. DocuSign really should have some confetti on that side. But I think the real key here is that we now look at real progress, what's going on in resilience. We've now, 2 years ago on this stage, Janine, we co-founded the Unicorn Council of FinTech with Innovate Finance. That's now, 150 billion of CEOs as a group, growing at around 40%, all founded here in the UK, all could list you in the next 2 to 3 years. So the real thing is that we don't have a capital problem in the UK. We've got trillions of it. What we actually have is we have a wiring problem. It's like the UK sat on a massive power battery pack, but it's not wired to the highest, most fastest growing companies. Why is that? We've founded 200 unicorns in the UK. Look at the cap tables, no British companies, no investment companies on that. So when it comes down to real resilience, the reality is that what we really need is, there's really nothing going on in terms of the UK growing if it doesn't back its best of British winners. So I think the real thing I've really seen over the years is genuinely, since being a part of this amazing journey, and we've just got to an inflection point of growth, the reality is that in Britain we've got something that's quite unique about us as well. We've kind of got this incredible way of, we're brilliant inventors. Think about it, like commerce, the rule of law, the jet engine, the World Wide Web. We're just also in a very English way, we politely give away the upside to someone else to then go and list it in New York. So we need to stop that. And one thing I'm really pleased to see, we just sat down with Lucy Rigby this morning, with Nikhil yesterday at Arsenal and etc., to effectively really remove that black hole of policy engagement that's actually really happening. Because if we're going to bring innovation back to the UK, the key thing that we need to be able to do is make sure that we actually keep the winners here, help them scale here, bring the talent, the jobs, and this time, let's not lose it.
Excellent, thank you. So, Etienne, you wanted to chip in?
Just to come back on some of the points made, just to really reinforce this idea about testing your backups to make sure they work, and also consider if you have been attacked and it's a cyber event, and you've got a forensics team in your production environment, where are you going to recover to? Do you actually have another environment that you can recover to? And I think increasingly, again, that's going to be a differentiator between, again, continuing operations have been resilient and not been resilient. And the other thing is the actual team members you have, the staff you're using to recover. Are you going to run them into the ground? Are you going to make them work 48 hours on the trot? How are the people going to deal with an extended event or incident? Have you thought about that in your plans to make sure your team can actually provide the resilience that you're seeking? Just don't forget about the human elements of the recovery plan as well.
Super, thanks. We're out of time, but final parting message from me. I think you've just touched upon. We've got the conditions for innovation. We need to create the conditions for growth. We've got the talent and the skill and the ability to be resilient, and those are the things that are going to maintain and enhance the trust in what we all do. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everybody on the panel for your time, your contributions and your insights today, and thank you all for coming and listening.